Hello, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. So, what is the value of TV and video to your brand? Is it driving a response and helping you make sales? Or are you simply painting a pretty creative? They can work together and do both, though, regardless of whether you're watching through a traditional method or on a laptop or mobile device. It's just understanding what is branded response. Meryl Draper is the CEO and founder of Quirk Creative, an award-winning and WBE-certified video advertising agency, and she's a subject matter expert in brand response, TV, and video advertising. And on this episode, we'll discuss how marketing and advertising can work together with TV and video for a direct response, this increasing focus on branded response, attribution for did it sell, cross-platform, thinking like a publisher, storytelling, digital trends, and much, much more. So let's tune in to a creative expert with a watchable and listenable shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Meryl, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. So,
thank you so much for having me.
Of course, tell us a little bit about your background and your career to date.
Well, I am the CEO and co-founder of Quirk Creative. We're a video-based advertising agency out of Brooklyn, and I started my career actually in public relations, so a different side of communications, working in DC for some of the big tech giants, but more on the media side. And then from there, I actually went over to Ogilvy and Mather in Bangalore, India, of all places. And eventually,
the obvious place to go to transition.
The obvious place, of course. And then I actually worked brand side at a startup in Silicon Valley for a few years before starting my own agency. So that was my career trajectory. And Quirk is 5 years old now.
Wow. So where'd the name come from?
Well, when we started Quirk, we were really thinking about how we can actually be different than the large agencies. I have no intention of recreating
a dirty
massive
word. Agency.
Yeah, it is, and it has a bad rep. And you know what? I get why it has a bad rep. Having worked on the brand side and actually hired agencies, slow, expensive,
not nimble at all.
Not nimble. And if you think about creative, those are all words that are the opposite of how it should be. And so quirk is really a word that feels different. If you're quirky, you kind of lean into your differences, and that's what we do as an agency, and it's also what we help our brand partners do, is find their differences and lean into those differences through creative.
So how are you positioning yourself from a creative standpoint? Because agency is kind of a dirty word right now. Creative can be, for those of us that have worked in the business growth place, creative can also be somewhat of a, that's all the artsy kids go over there, and that's not incorporated a lot in the conversation anymore. So, so how do you sort of tackle that from a branding standpoint of your own agency?
Yeah, creative is also one of those broad terms. Like, no one really knows how to, you're in the creative world. Okay, what do you actually do? So we focus exclusively on video-based creative. So anytime you see an ad, whether it's on Instagram or TV, we're the ones that are actually making those creatives. And, you know, you talk about it being a dirty word. Creative is required for an effective campaign. It actually, you know, obviously media comes into play, but you need a really good creative as well. And so we are specializing in creative, video creative that performs and actually drives ROI for brands.
Well, at some point I'm going to start another agency and call it Nebulously Vague, so that I can go in any direction. But I met you at TV of Tomorrow, and TV of Tomorrow obviously covers TV and video. But what were your thoughts on the conference in San Francisco? You know, they do it twice a year, San Francisco and New York. But what were your thoughts on TVOT this year?
I thought it was great. And you know what was the best part is, you know, when I first heard of it, the title of it really speaks for itself, TV of Tomorrow. And I think that in and of itself is really important, because when you think TV, you don't actually think next generation. You don't think of tomorrow. You don't think what the future of advertising is. And my perspective on that is actually TV is having a major resurgence. And so I was very excited to get into the conference and meet with people who are aligned on that vision and see the transformation that TV is having right now.
So, and to your point, I think a lot of the digital kids, if you will, love to think of it as TV of the past, but I could not agree
Right.
more. So
Right.
you also just got back from Cannes, from the
Yeah.
festival that is Cannes.
Yes.
What was that like? That was your first chance to
It
go
was
there
my
as well?
Yeah, it was my first cans, and you're actually doing a much better job than I am in pronouncing it the French way, can.
Which is sad considering that you speak French as well.
It is sad. What has happened to the world?
I know.
No, I follow your lead on that. It was a circus. It was overwhelming. You know, you're having lunch on a patio, and you overhear the tables next to you only talking about campaigns and advertising and media, which is kind of strange.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not used to just being around people who talk advertising all day, but really inspiring. I actually only went for 2 days, and that was plenty for me. And I walked away feeling inspired and kind of rejuvenated and excited about where we're going as an industry. I thought one of the best parts of it was just seeing all the panels about diversity and having leaders in the advertising industry making diversity and inclusion in the industry a priority for them. The next level of that is really walking the talk, of course, but it was a big talking point at Cannes this year, which I was really excited about.
One of the things I find fascinating, I was telling somebody, is that when you go to an advertising conference like TVOT or the festival that is Cannes, compared to a marketing conference, you get so many more thought leadership conversations with everybody. You go to a marketing conference and you find a lot of people that aren't necessarily the movers and shakers in the space.
Right.
But in advertising, it's more of a necessity, even when there is too much salesmanship. But it's more of a necessity to learn so that you can survive as a business, especially with TVOT and where TV is going, not where it's going to stay and die. But so I got a chance to see you speak about direct response TV meeting brand, and this is something that I've had a lot of discussions with a lot of marketers and advertisers over the year. Typically, they look only at TV as a brand awareness play.
Yeah.
And even at best, a lot of them still struggle with looking at direct response and understanding that. I mean, I can't tell you how many infomercials that I've filmed and aired on late nights that have been great, but I've also aired a lot of commercials that I've produced in order to that I'm sure are much worse than anything you've ever produced at Quirk Creative. However, I understand the concept, but there are a lot of people who don't understand how much that can drive a business. And we know this exists with video in social. And we're starting to see more of it with the connected TV devices, and we're able to track that. But, talk about what you see the value of leveraging TV and or video in a direct response fashion.
Yeah. Well, you know what's crazy? If you really want to get me mad, let's talk about budgets. Let's get mad. Let's talk about budgets for a second. I never understood in the industry why brand creative tends to get the lion's share of budgets versus performance driving creative.
Thank you.
Because, so historically, brands, I think, have put more budgets behind brand creative that's difficult to measure versus performance creative or DR creative. And it's just one of the things that I've never understood in marketing, because why put more money behind a type of creative you can't actually see the sales or business impact on versus creative that you will see the sales impact on? And I think a lot of emerging companies, D2Cs, challenger brands, however you call them, are having the same thought, which is we actually need to invest in creative that's going to drive our business and our bottom line. And we do both. We do both brand creative, we do both performance DR creative, but the up and coming brands are demanding performance from their spend. And that's just where we are today. So yeah, that's my thought on kind of the split, but we are in this moment where DR is then having a resurgence. And you're right about kind of the infomercial thing that you were talking about earlier. DR, direct response TV, has a real bad rap because 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you have a performance creative, well, it must be an infomercial that's running, at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. And is that really a creative that I want anyone to see? Yeah. Do I want that creative associated with my brand? And so the creative industry has had to grapple with, customers are now asking us to make creative that's going to drive performance, but it's got to look good.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
It's got to lift the brand up.
That's so true.
Yeah,
keep going.
That's where we are. No, that's where we are right now, is the DR is having a new moment. We're redefining what DR can look like and what it can do for brands.
Well, I equate it to all of content marketing. So much content has sucked for so long. And I think about this a lot of times with Super Bowl ads. The Super Bowl ads, you spend every bit of your time because of the cost and because of the reach that it creates, but you spend every bit of your creative juices to make the best ad possible. Many don't have any creative juices, and that's why some of those ads suck. But you spend so much time doing that, and then through the year, it almost seems like we are taking some of our worst ideas and we're filling in the other 364 days a year.
Totally.
And you could change your mindset and produce that creative year round and keep that focus to produce, not just show crappy branded content just to have something branded for awareness.
Right. No, I agree with you on that.
So where do you see the transition going then, if you're seeing this obviously more with people needing to drive growth? Where are you also seeing it in this convergence that we see coming even more so with 5G and sort of the marriage, if you will, of TV and video? Because I think so many of the digital marketers, they think of it only as video. So many of the traditional marketers only think of it as TV. But that just seems to be pushing closer and closer together with 5G, especially driving more of that on connected devices that we'll be able to measure.
Yeah, I actually see a lot of synergy between digital video and then this kind of resurgence of TV. And again, I'm going to call back the examples of direct-to-consumer brands, because I think that's really where your TV is having a moment, is because these brands are emerging and they're increasingly moving over to TV. But remember, these brands actually built their brands on digital. With digital video and with digital advertising. That's where these brands started. And so you need to have a marketing and advertising strategy that doesn't knock that to the side, but then extends into TV and OTT. It's really just about adding channels to your mix. You're not getting rid of digital advertising. You're still very much going to do video advertising on YouTube, on social, on native, but you also now have to have TV as part of your channel mix if you're really going to survive.
So one of the first things you hit on was brand response. And part of the conversation then, and it's the conversation marketers and advertisers have every day, is looking at, did it sell?
Right.
How do you start having that conversation with the brands and the other teams you work with on looking at that as part of the attribution story?
Yeah, so when we're having conversations with brands, what I do know, who want brand response creative, what I do know is we're going to be benchmarked on, number one, did this creative drive traffic, clicks to my website, intrigue immediately? So usually within 3 to 7-ish minutes of the ad airing, did it push traffic to my website? Secondarily, did that traffic convert to sales, whether it's signups, subscriptions, purchases, whatnot? That is really the KPI for brand response, the response side of it. Now, if you're measuring a little bit more long-term, where the brand part of brand response comes into play, is you're looking at measurements like, in 2 to 3 months, am I seeing a lift in search for my brand? And that's really where you're answering the question, did my ad stick with my audience in the long term? so that when they are ready to purchase, they are remembering my brand. And you have to have both. You've got to have the part of the creative that sticks with you, whether it's through humor or emotion or storytelling, and you have to have the part of the creative that drives immediate response, immediate traffic, immediate sales. And that's where you kind of mix the products, the features, that kind of creative into it.
How do you approach that if we're looking at this as a direct response, something that pushes it quickly? So much of that journey has changed. What kind of conversations are you having so that somebody sees and remembers the ad that's sustainable throughout a longer period than just when they saw an ad, took an action within a few hours, and so forth? What kind of direction do you give them to build a better content piece so that it can continue to drive growth longer term?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And we have this conversation all the time with brands, is like, how much do you want to give away in this ad? If you think about the traditional TV ad, it's 15 seconds, it's 30 seconds, it's maybe 60 seconds. And where we do battle with brands is a lot of brands want to tell the full story of their product or their company in those 15, 30, or 60 seconds. And actually, they don't need to, because all this ad needs to do is actually get the customer to the next point in the journey. So really, your TV ad should be designed to pique interest, to plant a seed, and then your down funnel channels, your websites, your retargeting, your display, is really where you're going to be able to tell more of the story that's going to drive your audience and your consumer to purchase. So TV still very much is that top of the funnel creative, but it has to be able to be paired with the other elements in the funnel to ultimately convert someone. And especially if you think about the TV audience as, the second screener. Everyone who watches TV, they've got a phone in their hand. They're, Googling on the side, they're doing Instagram, they're doing Facebook, they're calling their mom, whatever. So logically, when you're developing a TV creative or thinking about TV, you have to know that whatever my audience is seeing on screen, on their TV or on their computer, it's got to be content that's paired with the experience that they're getting on their phone. So maybe I'm planting a seed in my TV creative and I'm going to learn more about it when I Google the website or when I go to the URL. And it's that kind of pairing with other elements in the funnel that needs to happen. And that goes back to what you were saying about digital marketing, which is we're not casting digital marketing aside with TV. We're really just integrating TV into the full channel. So digital marketing can really pick up where TV drops off.
Well, it's something I talk about and complain about all the time. The customer only sees one version of a brand. They don't see a digital marketing group. They don't see a TV advertising group. People are not peeling back the many layers of who you think you are as a brand.
Right.
Well, you mentioned something that I'm going to pivot my question on. I was going to ask you about other forms of ads that really interest you. Obviously, we've got 6-second bumper ads. We've got 15s and 30s. There are a lot of minute type ads. But when you said Instagram, that again piqued my interest. When you look at what's going on with IGTV and how that's growing, especially when you think about all the different kinds of brands that you work with today that are smaller, nimbler brands, the new up-and-coming businesses that are jumping up, are they attacking video the same way with the traditional ads, or are they asking you to do new and innovative things like what you see on a portrait video on IGTV versus let's run a 30-second ad on YouTube?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think the 30-second ad is kind of the backbone, but these new companies are very much wanting to play with the video medium. Instagram stories, Instagram TV, those are all requests that we get. And it makes sense because the new brands are very plugged into the user experience, and they know their users are on their phone all the time, holding it vertically. So any kind of vertical format, Instagram story, Instagram TV, is actually showing a lot of promise for video advertising. And also, The new brands, more than the old school brands, are willing to experiment with things like virtual reality,
Yeah.
augmented reality. They want something that's still within the video medium, so to speak, but that's going to really enhance the user experience. So that might not necessarily be that sales driving tactic. Virtual reality is never going to like drive the immediate, response that you want, but it is a great video touch point to engage your customer and just show them that you're a cool brand.
I think it's going to be really interesting as well when new brands try just a lot, like where a 18-second ad or a 43-second ad, something different than traditional, will become the norm, and then everybody will jump all over it.
Well, what's also interesting is you're also seeing a resurgence right now with much longer form content.
Yeah,
I think a lot of the traditional brands forget that video can mean a short film. It can mean a branded content series. Something that's not just, a 30-second ad, but that uses video as a way to really further the brand. I think Harry's did it. One of the shaving brands that actually put out a short film that examined masculinity. And it was a fairly long piece, and it was really interesting, and it did wonders for the brand. So it was a full-on film. So, talk about subverting the 30-second ad. Let's just put out a movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Canada Goose put out a short film. I think it made it to the festivals.
It's one of the things, too, I think, especially with that kind of content, exponentially, we're able to start looking at more publishers being the brands themselves, and they can take a film like that, break it down into chunks, making sure that you've loaded your SRT files. You've got the SEO piece that goes with it, and you can just create micro content to use over and over and over. And I can imagine the day when somebody produces I'm going to make this up, a show about a family that runs a pizza joint.
Yeah.
And that's a show that you watch on dominospizza.com or whatever their website is.
Yes.
Instead of going to Netflix or Hulu, there are infinite possibilities with where this could go with what we do with video, and using that to bring people into your brand instead of just traditional ads and other story pieces that we haven't done. And nothing does it better than video.
Oh, exactly. And I think you hit the nail on the head, which is video as a medium is one of the mediums where you can produce like genuinely engaging content.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not an infomercial. Maybe it's a piece that people will want to share and really want to watch on their own. And what you're getting into is, miniature series, that things of that nature that genuinely pique audience interest, and video allows you to do that.
So if you look at brand response advertising, what are the pieces that we need to use to create a more effective video campaign that's going to drive response and growth and sales and leads and all that?
Yeah. Really, when you boil it down and you really synthesize it, it's two parts. So for brand response, you need one part call to action. So that is the response in brand response. It is the piece of the creative that's going to drive response, that's going to drive your audience to take action. So you need that to come through. And that's really the difference between brand response and a loftier brand piece where you walk away and you're like, what brand was that? Like, what product are they actually selling me? What do they actually want me to do? A brand response needs a call to action, a very strong call to action. And then the second part of it needs story, and that's the brand in brand response. So it's a hook. It's something with an emotional heartbeat. It's humor. It's any kind of element that's a little bit more nuanced that's going to make that ad stick with your audience in the long term, where they don't feel like they're just being sold to, but where they actually remember your ad and want to remember your ad because it brings them joy or some sort of emotional pull. So really, when you boil it down, brand response requires that call to action, and it also requires the story. Transition and aspiration are kind of the secondary tools to that. Transition really is, how are you going to transition from the story to the call to action? So naturally, you need to have a happy marriage between the two for it to be an effective creative. You can't just tell a story and then say, hey, here's your call to action. They need to be paired well. So part of what we do at Quirk is really we take time to think about what that transition looks like, from the emotional part of the creative to the harder working part of the creative. That's more of like a tool in your toolbox. And then aspiration, I actually think, ties into the story. You want to sell aspiration. You're never selling a razor or a tin can. You're selling a better life or a more fulfilling life or an easier life. And so aspiration and story really go hand in hand. We're telling a story about what your life could look like with this product or service. So, yeah.
So when you look at the industry today, what are you most excited about in TV and video and where it's going? And flipping a coin, what are you most concerned about?
I'm really excited about OTT in particular. I think we have just scratched the surface in terms of how we can craft creative specific to OTT versus linear. We are in the process of gathering a lot of data points around that here at Quirk, and we're building out guidelines that are specific to OTT. So I think by the end of this year, we'll have enough data where we can really put out some robust creative guidelines on that. What I'm nervous about is that brands get lazy, because I think with the resurgence of DR on TV, there's been a lot of best practices that have gone out, which is trending a lot of creatives to look the same. And it's gotten to the point where a lot of brands who want response from their TV creative think that means they have to be safe and play it safe.
They stop being creative in their thinking.
And they stop being creative. And that is actually the fastest way to not get a response and drive ROI from your TV creative, is if you start putting out the same creative that every other brand is doing. So that what makes me nervous. That's where we spend a lot of our time at Quirk, is just pushing our clients and our partners to think outside of the box in order to get that ROI. Performance does not mean safe.
Agreed. Well, Meryl, you're on a shark's perspective. There are a lot of sharks in New York who work on different streets named Wall, and
yes,
but there's some great diving off of the French Riviera as well. But I've got to ask, what is your favorite kind of shark and why?
So I have a great response to this, actually. I'm equal parts fascinated and terrified of sharks, but a couple years back I had an opportunity to go swimming with sharks in Tahiti, and we swam with black tip reef sharks. Yep. And it was one of the stupider things I've done in my life. I can't believe I did it, but it was incredible. So that would have to be my answer.
No, but I don't know that anybody's given a black tip.
Yeah.
But it's one
real
of the ones
scary.
you see a lot. Well, they only when they get in a frenzy in packs. So
yeah.
But just don't get a cut. So well,
keep
Meryl,
that in mind.
It's that special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions you're going to be asked today?
You betcha.
All right. Number 1, Brooklyn Nets or New York Knicks?
Brooklyn Nets. I'm from Brooklyn.
I know, so I had to, had to throw that one in. All right. Number 2, TV or video?
Video. Okay. It's broader. You can play more with video.
Number 3, San Francisco or Cannes?
Cannes.
Yeah, that's not even fair. As pretty as San Francisco is, no comparison.
I do love San Francisco. I used to live there, but Cannes is unparalleled.
Number 5, portrait or landscape?
Portrait. It's 2019. Let's get with the program.
All right. Yeah, there we go. Number 5, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Cornbread.
Wow, with authority too, because
I love cornbread.
there are no Cracker Barrels in Manhattan or Brooklyn.
Man,
They're not any in Cannes. You might find one outside of San Francisco.
I do love cornbread. I make it at home as well. I love a good cornbread.
Nice. So Meryl, where can people find out more about you, follow your company, your thought leadership, and more?
Findyourquirk.com or Instagram, where we're also always posting behind the scenes shots. It's the Quirk Creative. Those are the best places to keep a pulse on Quirk.
Any pictures of you in Tahiti with black tip reef sharks on Instagram?
No shark pics. Nope. Not on Instagram.
Well, Meryl, thank you so much for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure.
So there was my conversation with Meryl Draper, the CEO and founder of Quirk Creative, an award-winning and WBE-certified video advertising agency, and she's a subject matter expert in brand response, TV and video advertising. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with her. First, there is a need for both brand creative and performance creative. Interestingly, though, as she points out, a lot of up-and-coming brands, i.e. brands without a lot of money to waste, are demanding performance from their spend. Because of that, direct response is having a little more of a resurgence as well. So customers don't expect and won't accept less, and neither should you. Creative agencies like Meryl's can and should push TV and video so that it looks good and lifts the brand up. And it has to perform for direct response ads. As she said, and I quote, DR is having a new moment with what it can look like and what it can do for brands. I agree. So like all branded content, great creative takes more effort. Push for it. Second, TV is having a bit of a moment because a lot of brands have been built by digital-first companies with digital video and digital advertising, and it is extending and adding TV as a channel. We've been evolving for some time with our TV and video consumption habits, and that's why you see the spend shifting as well. But just remember to be careful, especially since so many brands look at attribution incorrectly. You've got to pair those ads with other elements and channels in your campaigns and optimize. Peak interest and plant a seed. Example, when you think of how we consume TV, it's more often today that you're holding your phone in your hand rather than a remote, or maybe the phone is the remote. So when you see an ad for something on TV, then what are you using to act upon that ad? Your phone. Your analytics would often show a digital ad that performed on mobile and not a TV commercial. Turn the TV ads off and then there's less leads and less sales. It happens over and over. To her point, you have to pair the experience they get on the phone. One channel should help the other. This shouldn't even be a question, but trust me, sadly it still too often is. Be more prudent with your TV and video and push harder to get better use of that spend. Third, and just for imagination's sake, let's start looking at the possibilities of TV and video differently. On many episodes, I've spoken about how brands need to think like publishers. There are a ton of shows that have come from Amazon and Netflix that didn't originate on CBS and ABC, for example. And who's to say that the next great TV series or movie couldn't be created as content by a brand? You see this a lot with podcasts, where some brands are creating original series that are outstanding but have nothing to do with the brand. Who's to say that someone couldn't do a show about how friends get together at a coffee shop and talk about life, like the show Friends? Maybe that show isn't necessarily streamed on Netflix, but instead on Starbucks.com, for example. Maybe someone like me would prefer to watch Shark Week's content all on Discovery's website. When you think about branded content driving a response, that's something to think about for the brands who have the pocketbooks to produce it. And 2 are great at producing content, and 3 are great at capturing that content and how it can drive a response for your leads and sales. But regardless, you know me. This shark is watching Shark Week wherever it's shown. So, got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you for the privilege of your time. I'm back to watching some beach TV for now. So join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.